Action. Okay, hello everyone. My name is SK Amaro. I work for the City of Portland in the Bureau of Environmental Services, and specifically, I work in a program called the Private Property Retrofit Program. So we help private property owners in Portland manage their stormwater on site and give technical assistance around all of that. Before the City of Portland, I worked for the City of Los Angeles, testing soils and concrete mostly, and all over the city in a bunch of different types of projects. And before that, I was in college getting an engineering degree, very liberal arts version of an engineering degree. It's a Bachelor of Arts in Engineering modified with studio art and with a minor in environmental services. And I will be presenting with my co-presenter on rainwater management.
And hello, everyone. I am Kellyn Baez, a co-presenter with SK. I work at Clean Water Services in the Natural Systems Enhancement and Stewardship Department. And that is basically to say that we do ecological enhancement work for water quality, habitat, and I personally look for ways that nature and natural systems like water and stream ecology can cross across any boundary, human-made or not. And Backyard Habitat Program, BHCP, is a perfect example of that. I too have a little bit of a social degree like SK. I got my degree in history of architecture, and I too am fascinated by the fact that it really comes in handy now. All of these systems and art forms all come into play, and we're both very passionate about stormwater and nature and look forward to talking to you about it today. Oh, and also we are speaking on behalf of Clackamas and Clark counties today. So the first thing we're going to do is introduce, you might be familiar with this already, is the areas of certification within the Backyard Habitat Program. There's naturescaping, there's eliminating or reducing pesticides, wildlife stewardship, removing noxious weeds, but we are going to focus today on stormwater management and how the various jurisdictions approach stormwater, also rainwater management. Why is this important? Depends on who you ask, but we all agree it's important, and we're going to tell you many reasons why. For backyard habitat, this is all about our urban water cycle. Our rain just hits our roofs, our driveways, our impervious surfaces, and anything that is on that surface is going to be picked up by that water molecule and taken to a natural water body and eventually winding its way to the ocean. So the motor oil, the brake pad dust, the dog poop, the fertilizer, anything that is on the ground that water is touching can make its way into storm drains and our natural creeks. So the more we can take care of it, the better, all for the health of people, fish, and wildlife. So on our left, you see a forest. It's green, it's got canopy, it's got a lot of different structures to it. This is what rain would normally hit. When it comes out of the clouds. But humans have developed a large part of what used to be forest into an urban landscape. That urbanization translates as our roofs, our sidewalks, our streets, our concrete. Rainwater isn't allowed to connect with the soil the way it used to, and instead turns into runoff, as opposed to soaking in and getting into the ground or hanging on to that leaf or being absorbed by bark, leaf litter, all the good things. So you might be familiar with a watershed, and I wanted to bring in a watershed to actually describe how it's all this big system, it's this basin. If water hits within this, anywhere within this watershed, it's going to go down to this one water source. But within a watershed is actually this new concept called a storm shed. And a storm shed is simply the water within an urban area, whether it's going through stormwater infrastructure or not, it is the water that's hitting that particular stormwater area. And if the watershed is the place that all precipitation drains to, a storm shed is all the stormwater that runs through that urbanized area. It's still going to drain, but the water cycle changes within. So where you have more impervious surface, you have less infiltration and more runoff, like we were talking about before. You can see on the right, the water cycle has shifted. But we can do a lot to make sure that the water is clean as it goes through this area by slowing it down and keeping it clean, all through very easy things that we can each do on an individual level, no matter where you live. At the end of the day, regardless of where water goes or what it touches, it's all one water and worthy of being protected and cared for.
And I just wanted to add on to what Kellyn just said about one water and just add my own understanding of when I think of one water. So to me, I think all the water is essentially ocean water. It comes from the ocean and is always trying to get back to the ocean in a variety of different ways. So to me, when I think of one water, I just think of every single teeny tiny drop of water, like it being a magnet to the bigger water that is the ocean, and it's always on a mission to try to be reunited with all those other water molecules, either in a stream that's on its way to a river or in a river on the way to the ocean. But either way, all the little droplets are trying to find each other and get back to the ocean. That's like, when I think about one water, that's what I think about. And I also just wanted to reiterate what Kellyn is saying, as far as where you are in the watershed and how that placement really matters for the rest of the watershed. As you can see in these photos, everything is connected. All the water that runs through these spaces are connected. And so where you are in the watershed puts you, it gives you information about who's upstream from you and who's downstream. And just paying attention to the place that you are in the watershed can give you a lot of clues to how you can manage rainwater, or what even type of rainwater is you're coming in contact with. um, so just wanted to reiterate that, as far as being in the watershed and your place within it. Oh, and there you go, one water. It's all one water. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about how stormwater management is related to the climate crisis. In the Pacific Northwest, climate crisis is currently manifesting. We all are witness to it. Wildfires, drought, flashier storms. And I just wanted to bring a connection between how climate crisis is manifesting and stormwater management. Um, so I'm going to take a step back and say that in the Pacific Northwest, the amount of precipitation that we will continue to receive isn't going to change. We're still going to get a lot of water. What is changing is storage, and how the storage, um, uh, what we have in storage, essentially. So what Kellyn was saying, as far as hardscapes and the rainwater not being able to get into the ground, previously, before humans paved things over, the soil was able to serve as a massive storage tank. um, and that allowed bigger trees with longer roots to be able to access water most of the year, because even when it was dry and we didn't have rain, there was that water in the soil that they can access. And so the soil itself acted as a storage. And the same way, the snow in the mountain acts as a storage. So precipitation falls on the mountain, it turns into snow, which stays up in the mountain for several months before it melts and flows down into the streams. And so that was another storage unit that we were able to use. Both of those storage units are now being intercepted and changing. So like Kellyn has already described, the soil isn't able to act as that storage tank that nature intended it to be. And at the same time, their snowpack is getting less and less percent coverage every single year. So with the long, dry, hot summers that's bleeding into fall, and also starting earlier in the spring, snow that falls in the mountains is less likely to stay, or precipitation that falls in the mountains is less likely to stay as snow and runs off into the rivers faster than snow. So that's all to say that our challenge is to be able to implement more opportunities for storage in a bunch of different ways. And what we are really talking about here in this presentation is using soil as storage. So just wanted to draw a line between how stormwater can actually be our greatest asset when it comes to managing these climate crises. So in the summers, when we have those long hot summers and we're getting more wildfires, being able to use stormwater to keep the ground moist and to keep the vegetation moist as much as possible will help keep those wildfires back. Same with drought, as I already explained. If the soils have more water in them, even if we're not getting rain in the summer, the plants can have access to that water. And then flashier storms, that's another way. So flashier storms are just a lot of water in a short amount of time. Um, and the 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 more water that falls at once, the bigger the volume, the bigger the force that it creates, running down our roads and into our streams. So if we're able to divert that large amount of water into a place where it actually has time to soak into the ground, then we won't be having to deal with massive amounts of water all at once, because the soil will be dealing with the soil will be dealing with it for us. um, and I also just wanted to say something about stormwater as far as um, not pushing stormwater off downstream. So as we've mentioned before, as you saw the pictures of the storm shed and the watershed, water doesn't stay in one spot. It will, if it's given the opportunity to move, it will. And as I've mentioned before, the more that it moves, the more that it's able to accumulate volume and the more force it has. And we also know that we have tons and tons of data. This is a whole presentation unto itself that I won't go too into, but we have tons of data that BIPOC communities, low income communities, refugees communities, and immigrant communities do bear the brunt of climate change just across the nation and across the world. There's tons of data for that. I urge you, if you don't have a great understanding of this, to look on the internet. There's tons of data out there, but we know this. We know that these communities, vulnerable communities, are bearing the brunt of climate change, and so climate change, the climate crisis in the Pacific Northwest, is going to be manifesting in these ways. And so the more that we individually, every single one of us on our little plots of land, the more that we are able to keep the water on site, the less likely it's going to move off into our neighbors and have a chance to grow in volume and force, and eventually end up in our brown and black and refugee communities, our neighbors, in their yards, because that's how it happens. It doesn't just appear there. People, some people don't just get extra water on their property than other people. As far as like rain, it flows there from other places. So the more, and that's where backyard habitat comes into play. Like the more that all of us individually can manage our little bit of rainwater, the better folks downstream will be, and they won't be having to manage a ton of water. So it takes all of us to do our small part, and to keep water clean and contained, and not a big force that it can be when not respected and treated with care and concern. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit hot, so I'm gonna take my sweater off. um, okay, just wanted to do a little bit more, try to keep it high level, not too technical. But here's two diagrams. The left is pre-development stage. So as you can see, the canopy is intercepting some water, some is coming up evapotranspiration, and we have the arrow you can see is a relatively small arrow for surface runoff. So there's some surface runoff, but it's pretty small. And the biggest arrow on the left side is the interflow. And that's just water that's moving subsurface underground through the soil. And that's just a way to explain what I was explaining earlier about the soil itself acting as a storage. And so this is just a diagram version of that. You can see that inner flow arrow is larger on the left side than on the right side. On the right side, this is post development. So you see a house there. There's some paths and sidewalks, and you notice the surface arrow is a lot larger on the right side. And so we're just depicting here all of that rainwater, stormwater running off and becoming this really large surface runoff arrow. And then as you can see, there's less in the soils, in the inner flow arrow. It's a lot smaller. And then the other arrow on there, the base flow, that's just the water that's always there in the aquifers and in the underground streams. And that those arrows are not affected by surface runoff or infiltration. That amount of water is just there. So don't get too confused or tripped up on that base flow arrow if you're not sure what that means. It's just flow that's always there. So I want to talk about just general stormwater, the impacts of stormwater runoff. So I've talked a lot about just water when it gains volume and it gains speed. That's really where we start to see the impacts. So we see erosion, pipe erosion, like you see here. Just imagine a huge rain coming, this stream just ripping through this channel, and that's when the stream is so powerful at that point that it's just dislodging huge chunks of soil, huge boulders, big logs, and then you start to get this erosion. And here it's pipe erosion. You can see the pipe there on the bank, but it's also habitat erosion because now there's not the material that used to be there that served as habitat. And then you can imagine that if this happens many times in this same space, that bank starts to erode itself, and that's like a whole other hazard. And then another impact is the pollution. So moving the pollution towards the stream, as Kellyn had described previously. The pollution that we have on our streets, it only becomes a problem when the water moves through there and takes it with it to the streams. So if the water isn't moving there through major roads, because it doesn't have the opportunity to get to those roads because you're keeping it on site or you're keeping it in your neighborhood, it's less likely that those major pollutants that you find more often on major streets will then flow off into the stream. And then, of course, because I work for the city, we think about this, the cost to maintain the pipes, maintain the ditches that get blown out. The storm, I'm almost positive you've seen those storm drains in the street getting just clogged with trash and debris, and all of that stuff. That's moved there through the neighborhood by the water itself. And then we have to go out and unclog those pipes, unclog those storm drains, replace them, because it just they take a hit when there's so much water and so much debris and pollutants and all of that stuff coming with it. So yeah, I just wanted to, that's like a really big concept that I want to instill in you all. We're going to get a little bit technical further into this presentation, but the main takeaways, one of the main takeaways I want to leave you with is the impacts of runoff, the runoff itself, and how rainwater turns into runoff, and just the accumulation of the volume, and that being what we're really trying to avoid, and the speed of it as well. The speed, the volume, and then the force that comes with a big volume moving. So that's really what we're trying to lessen the impacts by lessening the runoff and lessening the volume that's out there, so that it has less of a force and is able to soak into the ground. All right. So what we're here for is stormwater retrofits, and maybe you don't even know what a stormwater retrofit is. So a retrofit, just in general, is an addition of new technology or features to older systems. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Retrofits are necessary because we're not going to be able to just bulldoze our society and build a brand new, beautiful, glimmering society that has awesome stormwater management and doesn't create any runoff, because now we know, and now we have all these systems and technologies that we can implement. Some of that is happening, like as we build new, we have these technologies and information, and we are implementing these stormwater management techniques in new construction. But we still have all the old construction that we have to manage. And so that's where stormwater retrofits come in. So it's kind of a technical term to really just mean working with what you got, and how you're going to be able to get to the outcome that you want with the site that you have. And that's why I personally love retrofits. That's what my group does. We help homeowners work with what they got. And it does take a little bit of a different kind of energy and a different kind of creativeness. Is that a word? Creativism? You know what I'm talking about. It's its own creative muscle that you have to flex and really like think about what makes the most sense for your property, for this space. Um, and so I'll just go over a few elements of stormwater retrofits that I think about when I'm considering retrofits. I know you all are going to be coming in once these elements are in place, so you don't need to know so much about the design and that sort of thing. We're really just trying to give you as much information as possible so that you can notice these things, and have some more context when you're out there, knowing that you're not going to be the one making the technical decisions for these sites. So what I think about: 4 steps: collect and convey. So oftentimes the collect and convey looks like gutters and downspouts. How are you moving the water to where you want it to be? Number 2 is slow and detain. So in this, often that looks like, or at least in my work, it looks like a rain garden that has, and if you don't know what that means, that's totally cool. We're going to go over it. But just like giving the water space to actually slow down. Because as I mentioned before, it's the volume that we're concerned about, but it's also the speed. And yeah, when water moves really fast, it's that much harder to manage. So if you're allowed to slow it down before it gets really going, then it's easier to manage. And then the third step: infiltrate. Or I guess the third step would be, where would the water go? So often, like I said, we're trying to recharge the soils, get the water back in the soils, and that's what infiltrate means: getting into the soils. Also sometimes it can come up from transpiring or evaporating. But oftentimes with retrofits, we're trying to get it back into the soil. So that's what that infiltration. And I guess I will, the main part here too is for step 3. That's where knowing about the soils and taking the conditions of the soils into consideration, where that would come in as far as thinking of the retrofit and thinking of the design, the coming up with the design. You would think of the soil here in the step 3. And then 4, safe overflow escape route. We always want to have all of the systems are designed to manage whatever water is going there. And we know, like I said, that our storms are changing. And it's unrealistic to think that you're going to be able to build a robust enough system that it's never going to have an overflow. So a lot of times that looks like just having a route for the water to move away from the house onto the sidewalk, away from other structures where it can cause damage if it were to overflow. So you really have to imagine, like, if this system were to overflow, where's that water going to go? And how can I guide it so that it doesn't create more of an issue, like with the foundation or health and safety and all of that. So that was some technical stuff. Hopefully that didn't overwhelm you too much. The main thing here is just that we're really trying to mimic the natural hydrologic cycle by getting the water into the soil so that it can be used as storage, like nature intended it to be. And so the benefits of stormwater retrofits: it is the simplest solution. Like I said, being able to keep the water on site before it becomes a force, before it starts really gathering speed, is the simplest solution. And if you can imagine stormwater falling onto your property, onto your roof, it hasn't been able to go anywhere. It hasn't been able to flow anywhere. It hasn't picked up any pollutants. It's still really, really clean water. As soon as it starts moving down the street, that's when it's not clean. And I'll just say here that, like, in residential rain gardens that I build for people's homes that drain the rain right off the roof, that water's clear. I put edibles in people's rain gardens because that water is clear. As soon as it gets onto the ground and starts moving into the street, you're not going to be able to plant edibles in your stormwater facility because there's the potential for toxins. So if you see all those green streets, like stormwater facilities in the street, none of those have edibles, and often there's a very limited amount of plants that you can plant there because of the concern of toxins. So that's a little, went a little maybe off topic there, but that's mostly to say that it's just easiest to deal with it right there before it gathers speed, gathers toxins, gathers volume. And then it's also an opportunity for community engagement, especially when you have multiple people in the neighborhood getting pumped about rainwater, like rainwater management. um People just, at least in my experience, people are excited to work with plants. There's something innate, I think, in humans that it's just exciting to be able to work with plants and work in the soil and be in harmony with our surroundings. And then obviously the watershed benefits. That's what Backyard Habitat is excited about stormwater management for. Again, the toxins, less toxins going into our streams, and less of that super intense volume going into our streams where we can get that erosion that I talked about previously. So tons, and just I could go on about watershed benefits. And then the reduced costs of eventually over time, it does, it does take some input costs to make these retrofits, but over time, the plants really do the heavy lifting as far as managing the stormwater. And there's less of, and even when you do need to make changes to these facilities, they're really low cost changes. Like adding more plants or doing some weeding, that sort of thing. It's not the same as ripping up a whole street because a stormwater pipe has failed and we have to put a new pipe in. Like, such a different um, cost to maintaining these systems over time. And eventually, I'll also say in the work that I do with private property owners, we really are envisioning these systems to last into the future. So we tell homeowners that, like, yes, with a minimum amount of time and care and attention, these systems are meant to mimic nature, and nature doesn't have a time limit. Oh, my soils are all capped out. I've reached my 30 years. I'm going. This patch of ground is going into retirement. No, that doesn't happen. It just it can go on and on and on for millennia. So that's really what we're trying to replicate here. And over time, that's just, you can imagine putting in systems every 50 years versus having a system that can, just ride it out, go the distance. All right. So how can we help? So that's what we're here for. We want to do something about this stormwater management. So I'm just going to put this slide up here real quick. This is the menu options that we're going to be going more in depth in. But these are some of the ways that we can help. So it's really exciting that you all are a part of this program, so that we all can work together to keep stormwater on site and keep it clean and keep it nice and fresh for all of our other species friends. And then here's the same list, but with a little bit more exciting visuals on that. So we'll be going through all of these one by one and giving you a bit more information. But first, we wanted to give more context for where we are doing these retrofits. I did mention a little bit that especially with retrofits, you got to work with what you have. And I was speaking more to like the site specific what you have, and then there's the larger where you are in the watershed, and the greater system that that site is a part of. So we wanted to speak to that a little bit, since backyard habitat is in 4 counties now, and it covers a wide area that it cannot be treated the same. So let's talk about that just a little bit. I'll pass it to Kellyn.
Thank you, SK. So I'm first going to touch on Clackamas and Clark counties, which look a lot like this, just beautiful, forested, and has a little bit more of that upper mountain watershed feel. And this can vary across, just as SK was saying, this can vary across the entire watershed, right? Within a watershed, you could have a forested part, a floodplain part, an agricultural area, an urban area. It's all very site specific, but for the sake of humans needing to have a system and be able to manage accordingly, we are using this by county right now. So for Clackamas and Clark counties, we have snowmelt. That is different from some of our other watersheds. We have Mount Adams with this snowmelt and obviously providing a slow and consistent melted supply of water over the course of the season. That's feeding the watershed, as well as Mount Hood for Clackamas County. And so this is unique, and this is really, really special because there's just so many ways for water to go from snow, melt into a stream, and ultimately make its way again to a larger river and ultimately to the ocean. And for Clackamas and Clark counties, within each county, you have different areas with different soil types. And so therefore, different stormwater management needs, as we've been echoing throughout this presentation. You could be in the forest, but it depends on what that site looks like to determine your strategy. So if you have a clay soil, that could be like poor drainage because it's a little bit tighter. So something like a rain garden or a downspout disconnect would not be recommended until you can amend that soil and mix in some structure, some more organic matter to be able to actually infiltrate and soak through. Because as you may be familiar, if you just have a clay soil, it's like a hard pan, it will not drain. And so you just need to be very site specific. Also, with Clackamas and Clark counties, because they have more higher order streams, meaning there's just a little bit more elevation, a little bit more rock substrate too, you're going to have slopes. Slopes are really common in these watersheds. This requires special care to prevent erosion. And you don't want to remove plants by any stretch. I mean, plants are what are holding these slopes together. So the more you can plant with different root depths, the better. You definitely want to remove small patches of weeds at a time and immediately replant, because if you do this a whole site prep, you're taking that valuable root structure out of the soil and making it more prone to erosion. So a little bit at a time is better. And our native plants are adapted to the area, so they're always going to have like just site appropriate root depths and adaptability to our climate. And for slopes, we highly recommend consulting a geotechnical engineer. Some of these are really tricky and just require that engineering know-how because they might require a level of moving soil and thinking about hydrology that is beyond simply planting plants. So when you see slopes, have your geotech referral hat on, if you will. And for whoops, got my slides mixed up. So how a property has been constructed to drain stormwater depends on location and the year that the home was built. This is so key because, as many of you know, regulations will have changed over time. I mean, how we build has changed over time. I'm sure you're familiar, like more houses, less yard space, could be more drain or a more impervious surface for runoff. So oftentimes, especially with recent development, you're going to have stormwater infrastructure. You're not going to need the retrofits that SK was recommending earlier because it's just new development. Humans realize that stormwater needs to be addressed, and so we've built that into our modern development. So often they're connected to storm drains, We're trying to keep it on site whenever possible. So if you have a yard, draining it into that yard is always preferred. And sometimes you'll see bioswales. You can see on the right, this is probably draining the street and the sidewalk, where you just have the appropriate plants and allowing water to slow down, have the sediment settle, and be able to move through a system before it drains into a natural creekway. French drains and other sort of human-made elements can also help, like on your left here. This allows water to run down this drain through the rocks, same system of settling water, slowing it down, helping clean it. And this can help with various properties depending on the locations and the parameters you're working with. Some French drains are appropriate. It would appropriate option for your site. It all depends on soils, slope, and a host of other considerations.
Okay, I wanted to talk about Multnomah County a little bit. So if you see in this photo, I have the boundary of Multnomah County outlined there in black, and you can see this is the macro watershed that Multnomah County is a part of. So this is a Columbia River watershed. You can see it starts all the way up in Canada and all the way over to Wyoming, and it all drains to the Columbia and then out to the ocean, where it can connect with the Pacific Ocean again. So this is, I just wanted to put this up here to just bring your awareness to where we are in the watershed and what could that mean for the water that's passing through us. So we're, as you can see, at the bottom of the watershed. It's where this big area is really focusing down and coming to a point. And so that means a lot of the water that's going to be passing through us is coming from a really, really far distance. And the greater distance that you have, the likelier that you're going to have more pollution. So that's just something to keep in mind, that where we are in the watershed, all the way at the bottom. Okay, so this is the city of Portland. I worked for the city of Portland, so I know this system pretty intimately. And in the city of Portland, we have a pretty complicated patchwork-ish type stormwater system. So this is the different types of stormwater systems, the systems that drain our stormwater in the city of Portland. So this doesn't have to do with sewage, sanitary, that sort of thing. This is specifically for stormwater. So as you can see, we have 4 different types. We have the natural waterways, more along the west side and along the Columbia Slough and I guess, yeah, the Columbia River as well. So the natural waterways just means the stormwater flows to streams and ditches, a system that's not piped, it's not underground, it's not gray, as we say, it's not made out of concrete, it's made out of natural waterways, so ditches, streams, that sort of thing. And in the city of Portland, we see a lot of that, especially on the west side. And then we have more in the center of the city, we have a combined sewer. So that's actually where the rainwater and the sewage mix together into the same pipes. And that water is all pumped all the way over to North Portland, where it's cleaned and then sent back to the rivers. Sumps and dry wells is this brown all the way to the east. So that means that the storm water is actually just going straight into the ground, where it can come in contact with the groundwater table and recharge aquifers. And then our final system is this patch of the combined sewer with the sumps. So in these like hashed areas, to the north-ish and then a little bit over here to the south, um, you have some stormwater getting into those combined sewer pipes and being treated at the treatment plant, and then some going straight into the ground through storm drains in the street, and then that goes into the ground. So that's more of a patchwork. And I put this up here to say that the way we think about stormwater and the way we want to manage it does is informed by the system that it's in. So in the combined area right here to in the center, we are really, really concerned about volume. because there's so much water in those pipes, that we really want to get the rainwater, the volume of the rainwater out to give more space for that black water. Um, all the way to the east, we're not so much concerned about volume because it goes into the ground. What more we are concerned about is having clean water go into the ground. So we're really concerned about water quality, not so much the volume. So that's just an example of how the systems can inform what kind of retrofits make sense, or where you really want to like put your efforts. What's going to be make the most sense for the system. And so the city of Gresham, I'll come back to here. So you'll see the East Portland has that sumps and dry wells, and then we move even more east, and that's how we get to Gresham. So Gresham is pretty different system from Portland. They don't have any stormwater being pumped to a treatment plant and being treated. So they have a single piped stormwater system, which mostly drains to rivers and streams. And so this map here shows the different watersheds within the city of Gresham. And so each of these different colors drains to its own water body. So this is showing that whatever rainwater falls in this purple area is going to eventually find its way to the Columbia Slough. And then they also have a small amount of sumps, similar to the sumps in Portland, where the water just goes into the ground and soaks into the ground and finds the water table and recharges the aquifer. So especially in the city of Gresham, managing stormwater is that much more important because there is no built infrastructure to kind of to add some like space between when the water drops and when it gets into the stream. Whereas in the city of Portland, some of that water is being treated. We can manage that kind of like towards the end of, we can manage some of the pollutions and all of that at the treatment plant. Whereas in the city of Gresham, the treatment plant, there's no like last ditch effort at the treatment plant. And so I have some resources here about the downspout disconnection program. And they have a pretty awesome map where you can actually put in your address, and it will give you some recommendations as far as if it's a good site for downspout disconnection or a rain garden. And then they also have their own stormwater management where you could get some more information. If you just search City of Gresham stormwater management, it'll come up on your Google search, and then you can download the PDF. And then here's just another picture showing the natural waterways versus the sumps. So as you can see, most of Gresham drains directly to streams and waterways. And then the rest of it drains directly into the groundwater table. All right.
And thank you, SK. Now I'm going to take us over west of the mountains, the Tualatin Hills, and go into the Tualatin River watershed. This is west of Portland before you get to the Coast Range. And this is a really unique watershed for a lot of reasons. As you can see on the map on the right, this is very unique in that you have almost the entire watershed, which is in the gray, composed within a county, which is in the yellow. And then we have a water utility, which I will talk about in a minute, on the urban area with is marked with the blue, but I will talk about that in a second. In regards to the Tualatin River watershed, it is about 80 miles long, and it has a headwater system that goes over rocks and has a lot of trees and waterfalls, and it's beautiful. If you've ever been to Lee Falls, or if you haven't, I highly recommend. But as it gets to its floodplain, right around Forest Grove Cornelius area, and all the way to the Willamette, it really starts to meander. And that's one way a flat water body takes energy out of its system, is it just meanders back and forth. And so I said 80 meandering miles long. Not all 80 are meandering, but it's what most folks who live in the urban area associate with the Tualatin, is this kind of slow moving water body. As you can see, it drops 1 inch per mile toward its end. So often the joke is, you drop a leaf into the Tualatin River and you don't know which way it flows. because it's just so slow. My coworker likes to say it's a slow and sensitive river because it is 100% rain fed. So as you can see from other watersheds we were talking about in Clackamas and Hood counties, those have snowmelt feeding them, not the Tualatin River watershed. This is entirely rain-fed. So you can see Haga Lake, there's a lot of drinking water, recreation, agriculture, irrigation. It all comes from this river. It's vital that we protect it because it is our only water source on the west side. Also, to be associated with the Tualatin River watershed are the soils. I couldn't find a map that really showed it, but as you can imagine, way back millions of years ago, these Missoula floods came raging down the Columbia River and deposited all this beautiful, rich, floodplain type fine soils, those clays. They're very sediment oriented, they're very sticky. If you've ever played with clay, highly recommend as well. It's just sticky and tight is how we would describe it. So this can also mean that we have kind of tough drainage. Oftentimes, as you start to build and compact these clay soils, you eliminate whatever little pockets you had in them. And so water tends to just run off them after they've soaked through. And within the Tualatin River watershed, you have Clean Water Services. Clean Water Services is a water resources management utility that does not address drinking water. However, we address stormwater and the wastewater that comes out of our 4 treatment plants. And we just celebrated our 50-year anniversary, so I have to always remind myself that the water quality got so bad in the 1970s and a little bit before that the community actually said, stop outbuilding, we have to address this water quality issue. And so there was a building moratorium, and it was established that what used to be United Sewage Agency is now Clean Water Services, would be the entity that manages this problem and cleans our water. And so it went from 26 facilities across the basin to the 4 that we have now that now manage our wastewater. Anything that you flush or drain that goes down a drain in your home goes to one of these treatment plants and then goes to the Tualatin River. Now, something that's unique to the county, Washington County, is the fact that we have a lot of new development and we are a newer entity in relation to, when development happens. And, oh, says, okay, could you mind going back one slide?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And that means that we have a separate system. So we have a separate stormwater system and a separate sewer system. That means that they are not together whatsoever. So if you're in Portland and you are concerned about, okay, it's raining, I'm in one of those areas that you saw on SK's map where there could be overlap with the stormwater system, really essential that you disconnect your downspout if appropriate so that you can separate that. We do not have that in Washington County. We have a stormwater infrastructure, and I'm sorry if you can hear the plane going above me. We have a stormwater system that pipes stormwater to various stormwater strategies. So if you've seen a green planter along the street, or if you've seen a water quality facility, we'll talk about those later. This is all to clean your stormwater. So oftentimes people might see, oh, I've got a gutter going into a pipe, I should disconnect that. Not necessarily in Washington County. Newer development, separate system. And so in addition to all these things that we do, we also maintain these over 650 miles of gray and green stormwater infrastructure within 12 member cities.
Oh, my presentation went. Okay, there you go. Oh.
Never fails.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. So I want to just have you brainstorm with me for a second. This is Jackson Bottom Wetlands, and when we think about reference site conditions, like what did it look like pre-colonization, pre-development as we know it today? This is what I like to think it probably looked like. You have lots of wetlands because it's a very flat basin. You have a lot of shrubby trees because that is what's been adapted to the climate as well as the animals such as beavers and deer for this area, and a lot of deciduous trees as well that can handle the fluctuating water levels throughout the floodplain. And this would have connected floodplains. So as that water fills up the river in the wintertime with rain events, it then flows out into its floodplain and slows that water down and doesn't have the force that SK was talking about, which leads to less erosion. Water could spread and slow and infiltrate and get into the ground. And we also had beavers that made those wetlands really complex and held back a lot of water, so it really slowed down. And then we have some land use changes. So this is an aerial of Butternut Creek, Johnson Creek, and a little bit of Fano Creek on the right, all below Highway 26 and Highway 8 in Washington County. And you can see there's been a lot of probably agriculture change. There you can see there's a lot of trees here, but there's been a lot of conversion to agriculture, which still has a little bit of infiltration, but it still creates a lot of runoff too. And so you're just going to have this land use change, less of the Jackson Bottom wetland scene that you just saw earlier. Now fast forward to 2018, and you're going to have urbanization and development. And so you can see how we went from ag fields that have a little bit of infiltration now to a lot more gray impervious surfaces. And so you can see how we also don't have as many buffers. You know, Beaverton Creek on our left there kind of winds through a lot of gray. And so all the more reason, if we can contribute to having our stormwater stay on site, it doesn't have those wide buffers like it used to where it could filter before it gets to the stream. It's now on us. We have to take care of that stormwater before it goes to the stream. And what is Washington, or excuse me, what is stormwater or rainwater management? What do those solutions of today look like? There's a lot of overlap here with what SK was talking about, and we'll dive into some of these more in detail. But if you're out in Washington County, this is what you will see. You will see vegetative swales up on the left where water from the parking lot can drain into. You will see water quality facilities like what you see on your right. Oftentimes, these are fenced in to indicate that these will be maintained by either a city jurisdiction or Clean Water Services. And often the question we get is, what is that caged vegetation? Like, why should I not go in there? It's purely to designate that this is a facility working for us. This is filtering and draining stormwater. So planting it with native plants, maintaining it so that it's functioning, and also providing a lot of habitat for wildlife too. At the end of the day, though, as SK said too, all of these are dependent on the right site with the right conditions. Awesome. So the first approach we have is the large canopy tree. There are some pretty amazing numbers out there, none of which I have in front of me, but that basically tell us how much water a very large tree, often evergreen can definitely hold more and have a bigger impact on stormwater. I mean, when you think about, we were talking about in the very beginning, a water droplet hitting the leaf or the needle, hitting the branch and slowly making its way down. It can store a lot of water in its canopy, and then it can take up a massive amount of water through its roots and out through its leaves or needles. And the City of Portland BES has a tree bait program where it encourages to plant these trees, but we do want to make note that evergreen trees are going to have more benefit. Deciduous trees are great. There is a sense of right tree, right place here. So we recognize that this isn't necessarily, it is appropriate to plant trees at all sites. However, right tree, right place, and know that this does come with a lot of maintenance. This comes with a lot of care. SK and I were talking earlier, and he brought up the really good point of when the ice storm recently hit, how a lot of these trees that weren't cared for, large branches were falling down and damaging roofs and damaging power lines. So it can be a big responsibility to take on a tree like this on your private property. However, they are essential for really good habitat. Some of our bigger birds, like eagles, really value these tall trees, and they impact stormwater in a really beneficial way. Also, I have to do one more plug. The tree bait program is only available in the fall, if I'm right, SK, because we want to encourage folks planting before the rains so that you're not having to irrigate right in the middle of the summer. Keep that tree alive.
Yeah, and Friends of Trees, I want to plug them. They work across multiple counties, so it's not just a City of Portland resource, and they can really help support owners in picking the right tree for the right spot, and then supporting sometimes with even establishment period and that sort of thing. So super awesome resource. Not I'm wearing my official BES hat, but I almost always wear a Friends of Trees hat because I'm a huge fan. Okay, so I'm gonna go into downspout disconnections. Again, all of these really, some of them are appropriate for most sites, and still context is really important, and that's especially true with downspout disconnections. So the form that this takes is putting extensions on your downspout and extending the water away from the buildings into the landscape area. And the function, the vegetated landscape area filters the water and allows the water to soak into the ground from the roof runoff. Um, so again, I'm going to give you some numbers here, some technical information as far as sizing and design, mostly just to give you a sense of if this downspout is draining to an area that's sized appropriately. We size it on a 10%. So if you have per downspout, so imagine this downspout is draining 1,000 square foot roof. We want to make sure that the vegetation that it is going to is at least 10% of that 1,000 square feet. So we want to make sure it has at least 100% or 100 square feet of vegetated area, not 100%. And again, that's not really for you all to decide, but it can give you a sense of like, oh, this is kind of a small area. Like, let's think about this a little bit more. And we do want to make sure that the landscape area is sloping away from buildings, away from foundations, a slight, gentle slope. So again, we don't want really dramatic slopes, because even if it's a vegetated area, the water is not given the opportunity to actually stay in one place long enough to soak into the ground. So even if a vegetated area, super steep slope, the water is going to roll right off of that. So we don't want steep slopes, and we definitely don't want slopes going back towards the house, because that's how you get water going back towards your basement, and causing all kinds of issues with that. And disconnected downspouts can be used in concert with other stormwater facilities, so you can get pretty creative with these things. I've seen people do all kinds of cool traverses across big buildings, with like musical instruments inside, and then moving the water with the downspout, to maybe or moving the water and having it disconnected, and then having that flow into a rain garden or a naturescaped area or something like that. So really, downspout disconnects, you could use them to really move the water and get pretty creative. And super, super, super important, the last two bullet points here. Erosion control advised at the discharge point of the downspout. So the discharge point, if you could see my cursor, it's really that moment when the water leaves the downspout and then is past the downspout. So that little opening right there, that's what we call a discharge point. And you can see this green landing pad really for the water. And that's to help control erosion. So you can imagine, we've been talking about water and how fast water can move, especially when it's hitting like a hard, smooth surface like the inside of a downspout. That water, even small amounts of water, it's moving quickly down that downspout. It's just zipping right through. And if you don't have this splash block here, it hits the ground right outside the discharge point, and then the ground actually dissipates the energy that the water has. So over time, you can actually get erosion, or like a small little bowl or basin developing right here where the discharge point is, and then the water is just gonna sit right there, right next to the house, and again cause problems for the foundation, and safety and all of that. And then finally, especially in the combined sewer that I mentioned in the middle of Portland, where these I think is there? You can see, yeah, there's a little standpipe. So standpipe is that pipe that comes up out of the ground. And in a combined sewer system, like where I often work, that pipe is going straight to the sewer. So if you don't cap it, that's an awesome way for all kinds of critters to find their way in and out of the sewer system. So especially if you're disconnecting in a combined sewer area, the cap on the standpipe is super important. So here's more technical information. We want to make sure that discharge point where the water is actually leaving the downspout is at least 6 feet from basements, 2 feet from slab and crawl space, so any structure that doesn't have a basement, and then 5 feet from all property lines. And this is for the city of Portland. There are no permit requirements for the city of Portland. If you for each downspout that's draining less than 5,000 square feet. And Kellyn has already talked about in Washington County, downspouts disconnection is not an appropriate stormwater management technique. I don't know if there was more that you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, so in regards to permits, and there'll actually be a good picture to demonstrate this later. If you're really inspired and you really want a rain garden, you see that you have a pipe that connects to stormwater infrastructure, but you still want to do a rain garden, just know that you are doubling up on treatment. So that stormwater is already getting treated in a facility. And so if you're going to put in a rain garden where the outflow would then have to connect to the stormwater infrastructure, then you would need a line tap permit from either Washington County or the city jurisdiction that you live in. So it's possible that you might want to consider other approaches for stormwater management because you already have stormwater treatment via the infrastructure. So just know that if you are looking to double up on that treatment and create a rain garden, just be aware of your stormwater infrastructure.
Okay, and let's bring it over here. Okay, so here are some examples of some awesome stormwater disconnections. So I want to start with this one in the middle with the rock being used as a splash block. So you can just see how much force and erosion can occur from even just one single small downspout. So if that rock was not there, you can imagine the surface underneath that downspout is just going to get eroded, and there's going to be a basin there, and it's not going to be able to actually move away from the building because it's going to be stuck right there in that little erosion pocket that it made for itself. So I really like this splashback version using rocks. This green splash block down here is super accessible. You can see them all over. You could probably even get them from like Habitat Rebuild Center and stuff like that. I know my program has donated a bunch of stuff there. And then back up to the top left, these rain chains are a version of a downspout disconnect. And something really important I like to point out for rain chains is you definitely want to make sure that the bottom is secure. You don't want those chains whipping around in a storm and maybe smashing out a window or something like that. So make sure they're secured at the bottom, and then you can, and in this specific example, the pot itself is acting as a splash block. So the water is able to hit that the top of the pot, and you can see there's some like gravel and stuff in there. So that gravel is able to dissipate the energy, and then when the pot fills up, it overflows from the top. And so again, we just want to make sure that this pot itself is 6 feet from a basement, 2 feet from a foundation or a crawl space, and 5 feet from property lines, because that is acting as the discharge. And again, not to repeat myself too many times, but it is so important to really think about the specific conditions of your site or the site that you're evaluating. Again, I just want to bring attention to the slopes. So in this picture, you can see, like, even though it's vegetated area, the water is just gonna, it's moving so fast, it's not gonna be able to actually soak into the ground. and is not doing what we want and could actually cause erosion on this hillside, and cause a lot of structural concern with this property. So in this case, if I was out at this site, I would recommend heavily that they reconnect if that's an option. And I'll just also speak to the west side of Portland. We do have poorer draining infiltration, or poorer draining soils, because just like the topography, it really informs the soils. It's just different soils. It's a different landscape. So just extra consideration there on the west side where there's slower draining soils and steeper slopes. And again, very, very site specific, site specific. I really don't want to like scare people away from downspouts disconnections. They're awesome and they're super accessible. Like homeowners can just go out and do it themselves on a weekend. I think that's awesome. And it really, really, really depends on the region that you're in, the site, and the stormwater system around you. So just don't be scared, but just be super, super mindful. Okay, rain gardens. This is my passion. So I'll try to not get too excited about it. But rain gardens, the form that they take, a shallow vegetated landscape depression with a flat bottom and gently sloping sides. So a flat bottom is really important. That's gonna be the holding capacity. That's really what, when we're talking about sizing, the bottom is really what's holding the water. And you can imagine if the bottom isn't flat, the water is just going to move wherever the flat bottom. It's not going to stay. It's not going to be able to stay in one spot the way we intended to. So the the vegetated landscape depressions designed to collect, detain, filter, and infiltrate roof runoff. So I like to describe it when I'm talking to homeowners as a dry pond. Because we do design them to drain. Every jurisdiction kind of has its own expectations as far as how soon they want rain gardens to drain. In the city of Portland, that's 48 hours. We design rain gardens to drain within 48 hours of the most recent storm event. I know in the city of Gresham, they have a little bit longer timeline. I think theirs is 2 to 3 days. So they want the rain gardens to drain within 2 to 3 days. And that's really important, because we're not creating, like I say to homeowners, we don't want to create a pond with standing water. That has a whole other set of concerns that you want to be thinking about there. So that's not what we're trying to create here. We're really just trying to create depressions to give water time to slow down and get into the water, or get into the soil. So rain gardens can be used where downspout disconnections don't make sense as far as slope. So I really like this example. This is sort of like a terraced rain garden. So like I said, the bottom, you really want the bottom to be flat, but there's a way to connect multiple terraced rain gardens that are flat in their own right, and that can cascade onto each other and soak into the ground. So they can be used with some steeper slopes if you have that the bottom still staying flat and they're able to cascade into each other. We do like to plant with native and drought tolerant species. It just makes the most sense. Our plants are adapted to having lots and lots of water in the winter, and then having no water in the summer, with long roots, as Kellyn has explained, or they can tap into that water that's underneath them. And over time, especially after the first 2 years of establishment, they really are pretty hardy allies when it comes to managing stormwater, and they really can take a lot, and it's pretty fun. And then I'll just say that in the city of Portland, we aim for 2 inches an hour as far as infiltration. So what that means is if you fill up the rain garden, you come back in an hour, you want to see the water line drop at least 2 inches. That's what we aim for. I know other jurisdictions have other requirements or other expectations of their soils. Um, and even if you have slightly slower draining soils, there are techniques that you can implement if you really do want to put in a rain garden. I would encourage you to look up your city's stormwater management manual. I know in the city of Portland, we have a pretty awesome chart that breaks it down by different infiltration, and it does have options for slower draining soils where you just have to size the rain garden slightly bigger. So I didn't go over it here, but the sizing is the same as downspout disconnect. So you want it to be 10%. You want the rain garden to be 10% of the drainage area. So if you had slightly slower draining soils, I think I'm going to talk about it in another slide. But there are options available to you if you really want a rain garden. And so the setbacks are the same as downspout disconnect. So you really want the start of the rain garden where it's going to be holding the water to be 6 feet from basements, 2 feet from slab and crawl space foundations, and then 5 feet from property lines. And I'll also say that in my design, I like to be conservative. So I always site rain gardens 8 feet from basements and 10 feet from finished basements. That is my own. That's just to add a little bit comfort for myself and for the homeowners. It's not, obviously it's not the requirement, but it's something to keep in mind. If you have a finished basement and you're concerned about water getting in there, you might want to site the rain garden just give yourself a little bit of extra cushion there. And again, there's no permits required in the city of Portland for rain gardens that drain 5,000 square feet or less for residential projects. So that is not necessarily the case for commercial projects and industrial projects. They have their own review process. So I'll just put that out there. I don't know how many commercial or residential properties you all will be visiting. Just know that there's some other considerations for those larger sites. And I'll just go over, there's two strategies to create a rain garden. You could do the bermed style where you're actually berming up the sides, or you could do the depressed style where you're actually digging down to create that basin. And really it depends on the site. Again, what makes sense as far as bermed or depressed. And also it depends on your aesthetic and how much energy. I will say that like actually digging down does take some more energy than berming up. So it depends on your style and how much energy you have to put towards a project like this. And then again, I was talking about if you had slightly slower draining soils, you can over excavate, so you can make the rain garden bigger than it actually needs to be, or than it would need to be if it was 2 inches an hour. So over excavate, like really, really, really over excavate. You can add in a drain rock layer. I like to say that it's drain rock is not the cheapest material, and it also comes with its own ecological impacts. So I'll just put that there. No judgment if you need to use drain rock, but I'm just saying there's elements to consider if that's the route you want to go. And then you put in the growing medium, and then you have your basin, and the water can flow in. And so here's some variations on rain gardens. You might have seen them around dry creek bed swale. So they have the same elements of a rain garden. They have that depression in the middle with the slope sides. The main difference with rain gardens and dry creek bed swales or bioswales is that they have like they're more of a linear version of a rain garden, and oftentimes they're actually used to move water to a certain spot. So you can use a dry creek bed swale to move the water, and then at the end of the swale have a rain garden where it has that depression, and then it's able to stay in that spot. or they could just be meandering to just move it away from structures and other like pathways and stuff. And in these dry creek bed swales, the water is able to infiltrate even as it moves along. So it's infiltrating a little bit as it moves. So it's not so much of like an actual creek, like the name says. It's a dry creek. Okay.
And then I'll also talk about, so our next approach with backyard habitat stormwater is reducing impervious area. This is specific to the gray or concrete, asphalt reduction. So this is to reduce stormwater runoff. It's also to potentially create more naturescaping habitat, which can bring, mental health benefits, habitat benefits, helps animals in addition to stormwater. And also, this is appropriate for all sites. And you may not have the ability to do this on your property or in your neighborhood, but I would encourage you to reach out to, say, your church or your community center or your school, because those are often areas that have large swaths of concrete, especially in parking lots, that could be reduced with a community group like DPave, who will help organize a depaving project. And you could turn that into a really awesome naturescaping site and reduce that impervious area. 500 square feet is the minimum for this benefit. And here are two examples of pervious pavement. This is pavement that does allow rainwater to seep through it as opposed to run off of it. On the left, we have sort of individual pavers that have spaces in between them so water can infiltrate. And then on the right, you have a pretty smooth pavement, but there are tiny little air holes throughout it that allow water to go through it. This does need to be maintained, usually with a very, very powerful vacuum to get all the little sediments and things that we track in from our tires. But it is a really good option for these large concrete projects like parking lots. And I know some folks are kind of like, but like my patios and my sidewalks that I love so much, like I don't want to take those out. You don't have to. There are lots of solutions for creating those sort of hardscapes that you can have a chair sitting on or you can walk on, but still have water infiltrate. And this is a great example. They've got little pea-sized gravel and flagstone, and water is able to seep through that, but you can still walk across or set up your patio table. Another way to reduce impervious area is actually to remove or reduce grass or sod or lawn. This always feels a little counterintuitive because it's green, it's a plant, it's covering a large piece of ground. Shouldn't that be a good thing? But lawn is a lot like carpet, and it's especially after, homes are built and the soil is sort of like compacted, and then we lay out the sod in this nice green roll. It can really be like carpet on top of clay. And so reducing that and confining your lawn can actually help reduce runoff. This is again a 500 square foot minimum reduction. And that root structure that we were talking about earlier, lawn is one root structure. So especially where you have any kind of slope, lawn is not ideal. You want those deeper penetrating roots of multiple canopies and multiple shrub and tree types. And think about all the care and maintenance it takes to put into a lawn. If you want it to be super green, you're probably putting in lots of fertilizer, it's maintenance, there's a lot that goes into it. So save yourself and your time and reduce your lawn. It's a benefit. And you can also get a really cool naturescaping project out of it. You can see on this house, they've got their beautiful lawn on the right, but it's significantly reduced. And now you have this beautiful naturescaped area that, adds plenty of beautiful flowers to look at, great for bees and butterflies. There's just more for this than lawn can provide for the natural environment. And this is appropriate for all sites. No space is too small for this.
Okay, I'm just gonna touch on eco roofs really briefly. They're pretty unique. Hopefully, you do get to see one out in your work with backyard habitat. Probably pretty rare, but I'm putting it out to the universe, so hopefully you do see it. So I'm just going to show you this cross section taken from the City of Portland Stormwater Management Manual. So the key elements here are that the eco roof actually does have a waterproof layer that sits on top of the roof. So that's first, and then you have the drain rock, growing medium, and then the vegetation. So the eco roofs basically manage whatever stormwater is falling directly on it. There's no water being directed to an eco roof. It's just the roof itself. And because there's no other runoff coming to the eco roof, it is actually, they're pretty effective with managing just the water that falls on them. So some of it's stored in the growing medium, some of it's taken up into the plant material, and some of it even evaporates. But even so, eco roofs do need to have a drain. So if the water does move all the way through and finds itself to the drain rock layer, it then moves to this bigger drain and will eventually meet up with either maybe this drain is actually a disconnect and it's disconnected to a landscaped area next to this eco roof, or it could potentially go to a rain garden, or it could even go to the standpipe and back into our stormwater system. So this drain can really go anywhere, but it's necessary because once the water gets down into this bottom layer, it has nowhere else to go. So you really have to create a route for it. And here's an example of an eco roof. So you can see there is this drain still coming off of it. And I will say that like eco roofs they don't have the same amount of runoff that a non-eco roof does. So it is important for them to have this drain, and it's not as utilized as other roofs. So uh, they're pretty complicated to install. Maybe not. I've never done one, and I think it does need some specific know-how. So here are some resources that can lead you in the right direction. Tons and tons of resources out there. And it can be a really, really awesome element to any project that, like I said, you can use in connection with some other green water infrastructure.
And I'm going to talk about restoring soils. This is something that SK and I are pretty passionate about. I can't stress enough. We were talking about the force of water and how strong that can be and how that can contribute to erosion. But even on a minor scale, water moving really quickly just takes all those leaves and moves it right downstream. Value or taking away from the soil's ability to regenerate itself and actually put that really helpful organic matter that is free nutrients, that helps soil structure, that helps animals lay their eggs and creates habitat. There's so many values to really restoring your soils, and a big way to do that is to leave the leaves. So leaving debris via leaves, mulch, leaving a fallen log would also be really helpful to increase soil health. It's all about creating those porous holes within the soil and putting a lot of different size particles, if you will, in it. So your leaves are great. Other organic matter, when we say organic matter, it could be anything that just has the ability to break down. You can really think of it that way. I moved into a house where the soils were really poor, and I had so much fun laying down cardboard and really building the leaves and the layers. And like after a year, it was just the most beautiful, duffy, dark soil with tons of animals and organisms in it. And it was really, really great. And the plants loved it. So it can also, I mean, this is all related, but it really helps with stormwater. If you basically have this giant absorbable blanket sitting on top of your soil, that can hold a lot of water before it then goes into the soil. And if you have soil that has lots of porous elements to it, water can fill in those pores, as opposed to if you have compacted soil that doesn't have those air pockets, water fills whatever tiny micro pores you have and then runs off. So building soils is so important, especially in our urban areas where water may be flashy and want to scrape it all off. Restore those soils. It will be so helpful. And I just can't help but talk about the fact that, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years to this day, nature has all these trees that have all these beautiful leaves, and then they drop them every year on the dot every fall. And that is giving us free fertilizer, free mulch, free nutrition for our plants. And I know that there's always this temptation to have like the clean yard, but we are kind of robbing ourselves of this really valuable, helpful resource. So leaving that for your plants is so important and helpful and low maintenance for you. And some folks, SK brought this up. Some folks feel like, but if I leave my leaves, it's just gonna like accumulate so much, and I don't want this, big berm and pile of leaves forever. They disappear so fast, and the more healthy you make your soil, the quicker they will break down because you have so many microorganisms in that joining in that effort. So leave your leaves to the best that you can. It'll do wonders for your soil and for your plants.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that last point that Kellyn was saying. Like, I personally, like, I do a lot with soils and composting and all of that. I'm totally amazed by it. And even still, with all of my background knowledge, I am amazed by how quickly the leaves decompose if you just leave them on your lawn or in your like vegetation space. Like, seriously, within one season, like the leaves fall in the fall, and by the end of winter you can't even recognize the leaves anymore. And that's like in the winter season when it's really cold. It's decomposition happens slower when it's cold, and still within one season the leaves are barely recognizable, mostly decomposed. It's amazing. If you haven't done it, I encourage you to try even just a small patch. I think you'll see what we mean by how amazing it is.
And the bumblebees and the rough-skinned newts and all the other critters really appreciate it too, because often these animals lay their eggs on leaves that are on the ground or under the soil under the leaves. This ties into this too. You can also increase naturescaping for stormwater management. Increasing natives by 10% adds to that increased interception. So think about your water falling, a water droplet falling through this photo right here. It's going to hit your snowberry, it looks like, and then your Pacific waterleaf and all these individual plants before finally getting to the soil. So really helping with slowing that water down. You increase your native understory layers, which helps multiple wildlife. The more layers you have in your naturescaping, the more wildlife you're going to attract. And adapted root structure. That is all about, we were talking about that over and over again. Trees have larger, deeper roots than shrubs, which have a different root depth than your grasses and your herbaceous ground covers. So the more variety, the more soil you're holding together and preventing erosion from happening. And reduces your irrigation needs. Plant them once, get them established for a couple of years, and then you can truly walk away. This is appropriate for all sites. Even if you just have a little balcony and you want to plant a couple native plants, it's fun. It's very, very fun. Water conservation is another avenue to help with stormwater and reduce our water use, especially with climate change. The less water we can use, especially during the hottest part of the day, so water at ideal times in the morning and evening. If you're watering in the middle of the day, a lot of that water is turning into vapor and evaporating into the clouds, and kind of a waste. So if you are going to have irrigation, do it in the morning and evening. And let that lawn brown. So you've already done the work of reducing your lawn, reducing your impervious surface. Now let it brown. It's going to come back no problem. It will adapt with the a large amount of rain we have here and be green most of the year. But this is a really great solution to just switch our mindset about what we expect of our resources in regards to water usage. And then spot water only is needed. And consider watering, close to the root structure as opposed to broadcast over all your plants, which can also help from burning the leaves with the water droplets on them. And water conservation is appropriate for all sites of all shapes and sizes and all people. Eco-friendly maintenance practices. If you have a yard and you like getting out there, it's such a great form of exercise, and it really connects you with the soil and the plants and the weeds, whether you determine it's a weed or not. And I really like that it eliminates gas-powered tools, and I think about how this contributes to noise pollution and fossil fuels and fumes and the smell. So really be okay if you can with just doing more slow and natural yard work. And if you want to outsource this, you can go on the Backyard Habitat Resource and Landscape Professional list, and they have an entire list of contractors who practice these eco-friendly maintenance practices.
Okay, and so here we are back at our menu of stormwater management techniques. Thank you for sticking with us this whole time. And hopefully some of our passion got on you, and you'll be able to start noticing some of these elements in your neighborhood and with your friends and family and neighbors. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
And just so folks know, the two items that have the purple sort of cross or cancel sign on them, those are just to indicate that these are two options for stormwater in the backyard habitat criteria that you wouldn't be able to see. You would just have to hear from the program participants that they are doing these things. And we believe in trusting people, so we would just accept that that's what they are doing to meet their criteria.
Yes, thank you so much for touching on that, Kellyn.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us. It's just so wonderful to see volunteers, even virtually, to want to participate in this work. It's really, I feel like it's very much like we're in this together. And so from coming at this from an organization's perspective, you're absolutely helping us in our pursuit of clean water and keeping stormwater clean, but it's also like what's helping you. We're all in this together. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
All right, and there you go. Thank you, thank you. Gotta make sure I get that slide. Okay.